On the night of June 25, 1975, as most of India slept under the illusion of normalcy, a quiet coup took place, not by an army, nor by a foreign power, but by its own elected leader. Phones of opposition leaders stopped working. Newspapers were stopped at the printing press. Radio news was abruptly censored. Armed constables arrived in the dead of night at homes across the country, arresting political leaders, activists, and journalists. By the morning of June 26th, India had entered a new chapter, one not written by her people, but imposed upon them by authority. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had declared a national emergency, citing threats to national security and internal stability. But what followed was not just administrative crackdown. It was the suspension of democracy, the silencing of dissent, and the systematic dismantling of fundamental freedoms in the world's largest democracy. Behind the cold language of constitutional clauses and presidential orders lay hidden stories of fear, resistance, betrayal, and courage, stories that still remain underexplored. The official reason for the emergency was internal disturbance, but the real trigger lay elsewhere. In June 1975, the Allahabad High Court found Indira Gandhi guilty of electoral malpractice during the 1971 Lok Sabha elections. The judgment declared her election null and void, barring her from holding elected office for 6 years. For a prime minister whose aura was built on the Garibi Hatao slogan and her victory in the 1971 Bangladesh War, the judgment was a devastating blow. Rather than resign or appeal to the people's verdict, she chose a different path, one that bypassed democratic processes altogether. With the support of President Fakhruddin Ali Ahmed, she invoked Article 352 of the Constitution. Just like that, democracy was suspended and India was put under lockdown, not in body, but in spirit. One of the earliest victims of the emergency was the press. Censorship became institutional overnight. Editors received guidelines about what could and could not be published. Prominent newspapers like the Indian Express and the Statesman left their editorial spaces blank as silent protest. Cartoonist Abu Abraham's political satire was banned. Even obituary pages were scrutinized for hidden messages. The Information and Broadcasting Ministry under V.C. Shukla became the gatekeeper of truth, filtering news like a dam filters a river. You can't write what you think. You must think what you write, one editor bitterly recalled. Underground journals and samizdat leaflets became the only outlets for free thought, circulating secretly among students and intellectuals. Opposition leaders, irrespective of ideology, were rounded up. Jaya Prakash Narayan, the Gandhian leader of the anti-corruption Total Revolution movement, was arrested. So were Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Morarji Desai, L.K. Advani, George Fernandez, and thousands of others. In all, over 100,000 people were detained under the Maintenance of Internal Security Act, MISA. Many were kept in solitary confinement for months without trial. Families were not informed. Letters were censored. Habeas corpus, the cornerstone of individual liberty, was suspended. The Supreme Court, in a controversial 1976 ruling, ADM Jabalpur versus Shivkant Shukla, upheld the government's stance that citizens had no right to life and liberty during the emergency. Justice H.R. Khanna, the lone dissenter, wrote a stirring dissent that cost him the position of Chief Justice. But in the annals of judicial history, his dissent became a torch of conscience. One of the darkest and least known chapters of the emergency was the forced sterilization program. Under the enthusiastic zeal of Sanjay Gandhi, Indira's son and de facto power center, millions of men, particularly from poor and marginalized communities, were coerced into undergoing vasectomies. Officially billed as a population control measure, it was implemented with brutality. Government officials threatened ration cuts, withheld salaries, and even offered cash bribes to meet sterilization quotas. In states like Uttar Pradesh, Haryana, and Delhi, mobile vans roamed rural areas, rounding up men like cattle. In Turkmen Gate, Delhi, a protest against forced sterilizations turned violent when police opened fire on demonstrators, killing scores. The area was also bulldozed under slum clearance programs that displaced thousands overnight. "We were not poor. We were dispensable," said one survivor, now a grandfather, whose home and dignity were destroyed in a single week. The emergency also saw the imposition of a new moral code. Films were censored, students were suspended, and NGOs were placed under surveillance. School textbooks were rewritten to glorify government policies. The Youth Congress became a militia of loyalists, rewarding sycophancy and punishing dissent. Bureaucrats were expected to toe the party line. Those who resisted were transferred or terminated. But in the silence of repression, voices still found ways to rise. In Baroda, George Fernandez and his socialist comrades plotted the Baroda dynamite case, a plan to sabotage government infrastructure. Though arrested before it could be executed, their defiance became symbolic of underground resistance. In colleges across Bengal, Kerala, and Gujarat, students held secret meetings, smuggled banned literature, and risked expulsion and imprisonment for asking questions. Yet not all were victims. Many flourished under the emergency. Cronyism reached new heights as industrialists with government connections secured contracts and media houses peddled propaganda. Indira's inner circle, Siddhartha Shankar Ray, Ometa, Bansi Lal, and D.K. Barua, became the architects of autocracy. Barua's infamous slogan, "India is Indira, Indira is India," captured the cult of personality that defined the era. The Congress Party, once a movement of freedom fighters, was reduced to an echo chamber of obedience. There were, however, unlikely heroes. Judges who spoke out, bureaucrats who resigned, citizens who sheltered dissidents. In Lucknow, a postmaster named Hari Shankar Joshi secretly passed letters from detained activists to their families. In Calcutta, a nun ran a printing press in her convent, publishing anti-emergency pamphlets. In Pune, a group of students distributed banned copies of the Constitution under the cover of comic books. These stories did not make headlines, but they preserved the soul of a country gasping for breath. When the emergency was finally lifted in March 1977 and general elections were announced, few expected the results that followed. Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party were handed a crushing defeat. The newly formed Janata Party, a coalition of socialists, Bharatiya Jan Sangh, and former congressmen, came to power with Morarji Desai as Prime Minister. It was a moment of poetic justice, but it was also fragile. The Janata government, plagued by internal contradictions, did little to institutionalize safeguards against future autocracy. Within 3 years, Indira Gandhi returned to power, her image battered, but her political acumen intact. Even today, the emergency remains a divisive subject. Some see it as a necessary evil to restore order during chaos. Others see it as a betrayal of everything India stood for. The fact that no one was truly held accountable for the abuses, the sterilizations, the deaths, the disappearances, raises uncomfortable questions. And perhaps the most haunting of them is, could it happen again? Many young Indians today know little about the emergency beyond a few textbook lines. The names Misa, ADM, Jabalpur, Turkmen Gate sound distant, almost fictional. But for those who lived through it, the memories are sharp. A Delhi rickshaw puller once said, "My name, my body, my vote. Nothing belonged to me then." His story, like so many others, never made it into official records. The emergency wasn't just about Indira Gandhi or the Congress Party. It was a test of the Indian Constitution, a test of institutional resilience, and above all, a test of the people's will. And while it may have lasted only 21 months, its shadows are long. It taught us that democracy is not a given. It must be earned, defended, and constantly nurtured. It taught us that the greatest threat to liberty often comes not from outside, but from within. And it taught us that even in the darkest hours, a few brave souls can keep the lamp of freedom alive. Today, as debates rage over media freedom, dissent, and majoritarian politics, the emergency serves as a mirror that reflects what we once endured and what we must never endure again. It reminds us that vigilance is the price of liberty, and that when the Constitution is under siege, silence is not neutrality, it is complicity.